This is Peggy from War. So today is a special day. That's the last video of our series, and it's going to be also the last video of 2020, quite a year. So thank you so much, Philippe, for being with us in that special day.
Oh,
That's wonderful to have you. You're specializing in brand marketing. You founded brand engineering many years ago. You have a deep expertise in financial services. Would you like to tell us a bit more about your firm before we jump into the question?
with pleasure. So yes, you're right. It would be very easy to define my company GWP Brand Engineering based on the financial work because the particular work that I did changed the category so fundamentally. It was barely 9 months after we founded our company, GWP, that we were approached by ING and asked if we would be interested in helping them launch a bank, the first online bank with no branches, with only one product. And so ING Direct, the first one in the world, was created here in Canada by my partners and myself. And we were stewarding that brand for nearly 13 years and took it to the United States. Subsequently, we worked with Zag Bank. We recently, in the last 2 years, worked with People's Group and People's Bank. And so the more I reflect on the history of the company, even though we did work very happily did work for Expedia and Ferrero and all sorts of other categories, the financial category, nevertheless, always remained the most dynamic and interesting and continues to do so with the work that we have done with fintechs like Borrowell and FundThrough and others.
Okay, that's wonderful. So you're going to be able to give us a different perspective on what's happening in the financial services. So, and that's the first question. So what, from your perspective, are the major lasting impacts that COVID will have on the financial services industry?
Well, I'll do it from the point of view of a consumer. And consumers are a lot like people, as we like to say at our agency, and because that's my specialty, shall we say. And I'm also going to put myself in the picture for this answer because I think that, like everybody else, we've noticed that the ability to go digital, whether you were forced to do it or you were already there, has pretty much now tipped over to the other side. Through circumstances, we've had to move our habits and change the way in which we relate to banks on a physical level. So that's been very interesting. I've seen what some are calling the death of distance. In other words, where you are no longer matters. What you want to do is what matters. The other thing that I've noticed in this particular situation is, and especially for me, is it's brought out the lack of value that I'm sensing right now out of the banks. I won't name which bank I'm working with, but I'll give you the example that right now my daughter can send me money or I can send her money on the phone, and it's all very, very easy. If I want a client to send me the fee that is owed electronically from their bank to my bank, it's $60. That's ridiculous when they say, well, you could just walk it in for free. And I'm thinking, and you don't, how can I account for that $60? So I find that as a business, as a small business, it's very challenging to find real value for the business account. And I think that's making me look at it in contrast to what everybody else is able to do. So I think the payment world is going to change, and I hope that the business payment world changes as well. We need secure ways of doing this, but at the same time, $60, yeah. Really?
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. You know, I'm a SMB myself as well, and
yeah.
When I see these fees, I'm looking at that. I'm like, okay, so should I use my personal account to
Why not?
You know, it seems very silly. So in terms of regulations and policies, so you spoke about payment. Obviously, open banking is always one of the topics that comes back on this video series. Do you think we'll see new regulations, new policy appearing in the wake of COVID?
I would like to think that we will. Obviously, the track record, Canada's track record is to be cautious, always. Even though we have the new ideas, I for many years, did the advertising for the Canadian Bankers Association. And in every ad, I was able to say, at least for many years, voted the most exceptional banking system in the world for its caution. The banks give us standing in the world economic markets because we are so stable, our monetary policies, et cetera, et cetera. However, open banking is just knocking at the door, not to create too much of an analogy. And the more you start looking at the opportunities, whether they're opportunities that I'm helping market for clients or others, but if we look at it from the consumer's point of view, they want to say, they want to be the center, I think, of their financial life now. Not, it shouldn't be somewhere in a bank. If I want to have this from a bank and that from there, the kind of the IKEA model, you just get what you need. That's not possible yet. And so once, I mean, it's not possible to the degree that open banking promises.
Yeah.
And so I view it that way. As a sidebar, I also think that a bit like defund the police, open banking suffers from being a terrible word for what it is, because it sounds like we've just opened the doors to the bank. And it's more really permission banking. I'd love to think of the idea that I could say my bank would act as a gatekeeper and say, if I say, I'd like to connect my account to that, and they say, yep, okay, we've checked them out, they're good. I mean, I'm interpreting ahead, but I would love to see that happen. I don't think that we need a citadel around the banks, but one of the things that I would never want to lose is that sense of diligence and security that is what defines the bank. But from a marketing point of view, it doesn't define it from a value point of view, just security. I feel safe with the banks, but I feel attracted to others. And that's, I think, a challenge for banks.
And so you were mentioning the world and the global aspect that COVID is going to have. So do you have a perspective on where the global order or global financial stability is going? Obviously, all the countries are ridden with debts. The markets have hold off, I don't know for how long. It's a very, very weird time. So what's your perspective on that?
Well, I hope we're going to have, if anything, weirder times, or let me put it another way, rather. I have some faith in the idea that out of this period in which everybody battened down the hatches and tried to control everything, I think that people and business people and creative minds are saying to themselves, what will survive this and where do I put my energy? So I think we can come roaring out of this, or we can come out stagnating. So in other words, it's more like somebody who comes out of a hospital and says, now I really like life, versus I'm going to be afraid of everything. So I'm using a human counterpart to make the point. But I think that it's something like that will happen. There will obviously be certain industries that make sense according to the rebalanced world. But I think just about any business that was delivering value and it wasn't dependent on a status quo approach or such can really come back. And I think above all, we're going to have the will to do it, because we've never had this pause before, at least not in my generation, in which we were told to sit at home and do nothing. And of course we worked, but at the same time, I think it refocused what work means, what creating new things mean. So I am obviously an optimist, but I believe that, and I can't speak from a global perspective, but I think that, for example, countries like Africa, where the banking system is relatively new because and therefore very much ahead, using a phone is not new to somebody in Kenya or Nigeria or Ghana or something like that, to do everything. So I think that there will be people will be able to look at due diligence and say, what's happening in these emerging countries? And maybe the first world can now have a renaissance.
Yeah, I agree with you, and maybe like you, it's the optimistic side of me. I really believe we can make the most of that pause. And it's interesting. It's most people I've been speaking with are actually really making the most of the situation, or maybe that's what they want to convey. I don't know. But I also see the part who's thinking, well, I'm drinking a lot of alcohol, I'm watching a lot of Netflix, and I'm like, well, I'm not doing as much as I technically should, considering the situation, but at the same time, I'm still trying to do things. And I agree with you. I think it's going to be the same in terms of business. People
Mhm.
are going to be so excited to go back, and they're already so creative right now. If I'm looking more at the competitive positioning, this huge disruption have given the opportunity to disrupt the order in financial services. So what type of organization do you think is gonna benefit from that?
Well, I think that if the phase one of the impact of COVID has been to sort out those who can do business digitally and those who can't, which is the bottom of the triangle. That's just how. That's not a discriminator. It won't be a discriminator anymore. I think the next thing will be the real competitive value will be in an increasingly disintermediated world in which if my supposition is correct that people want to be the center of their financial lives. They don't want to be their own advice, but they would like to be in control of things. Then I think it's going to be a value question. I think we're going to be asking ourselves, I think that to come back to open banking, when a bank it can be at the head of the line because it is the safest, the biggest, it has the greatest range, and somebody else is whispering in your ear and giving you, yes, but it can do this and we can do that for you, etc. I think that a bit of a free market approach is going to happen to the large organizations who are going to realize that a regulated oligopoly is a great thing, but that that all the fintechs and all the ways in which we can optimize our financial lives using all these other brands is going to put pressure. If I was a bank, I would be asking myself, what is our hegemony? What is our dominance of the market other than our history right now? We can get a mortgage anywhere. You can get a line of so many products can be obtained for greater value. That being said, they still have a lot of runway because the vast majority of people are not trusting of new brands yet because they haven't established the kind of anchoring that's required so that at 2 a.m. when your spouse turns to you and you said, you gave your money to who? You have a good answer. So we're Canadians. We trust in good government and order, and we like to think of ourselves as all these other things, including being fans of innovation. And we would be correct. When ING Direct opened in this country, the fact that it was a success right out of the gate confounded everybody because you weren't supposed to be banking with a bank you couldn't pronounce, you never could see, you'd never heard of, and the only product you could do is give them your money. Yeah. They weren't lending to you. And so that, I think, was a head scratcher for the banks. They realized that, and the approach we took, which was add us to your bank, not fire your bank, add us. Well, they've gotten the hang of that. They now know what it's like. When you look at brands like PayBright, which just sold for 340 million, there's a reason that happened because it's another form of banking. They didn't want to use a credit card. They wanted to pay now, buy now, pay later. We've had that instrument for a long time. But why are they choosing that way of doing it? So maybe they're saying, maybe there'll be a time in a few years where our children or even ourselves are saying we buy furniture and cosmetic surgery that way. We buy, what's the credit card for anymore? You know, so many things are changing. If I'm Aeroplan, I'd be pulling my hair out right now because nobody can travel. So, and that's the benefit. So what's a credit card for? All these things are going to change. And I think that the big banks should continue to be big, continue to be strong, but not be too cocky that they will always have our business.
Mm-hmm. And so I absolutely agree with you. There is a great opportunity for the fintech. I think a lot of reason, at least one of the reason I see why there might not be more clients. It's also the fact that people don't know about them. You know, we are in financial services. We breathe it, eat it, drink it all day long. So we have this conception that everyone is doing the same. But you know, if you ask someone on the street if they know, and I'm not going to cite any fintech because I don't want to insult anyone, but if they know some of the fintechs where things are obviously well known, chances are they don't.
Oh.
So you know, there is a lot to be said with just, and you're the branding person, you're the marketing person, so you know that better than I do. But I think there's a lot of just lack of awareness from people about options.
Sure. Part of the challenge, of course, is marketing dollars that are required. But a brand and trust are built over time, not because you had initial money to go and do an ad campaign. So that's the great challenge. We need to observe. It needs to feel like it's part of society. And a bigger challenge that is happening now is if you look 10 years down the road in terms of demography in this country, we won't be the audience necessarily for these products either. The vast influx from the Philippines, from the Middle East and other countries, they're bringing in some cases an existing sophistication with fintechs, but in many cases not at all. And their habits, their reflexes to default to the existing systems and say, I want to go to a bank. They want to be endorsed by a brand that says, I have succeeded. I have a mortgage from one of the big Canadian 5 banks versus I got a better mortgage from a much more interesting and enterprising brand that I'd never heard of. And you'd think, given that it's a mortgage, that they have nothing to worry about. They didn't have to give them the money. They're being lent the money. So depending on whether you're a behavioral finance scientist or you're John Stuart Mill or whoever is looking at the situation, it's going to have to be figured out, because I think that the next generation of Canadians will upset the status quo in that sense, but it's going to take time because those products need to be trusted fundamentally.
I absolutely agree. And so if we stick on the transformation of banks, where do you see the traditional FIs, at least the ones who are willing to transform, where do you see them going?
I've spent so many years attacking them that I never thought about how to give them good advice in advertising. Not attacking, but at least pointing out their flaws. So the temptation would be to say they should be more like fintechs. But no, I don't think that's right. I think their culture is their destiny. And I think there is always room. There was a magnificent campaign years ago by Barclays when Matthew Barrett moved to England from Bank of Montreal. And the headline was, what the world needs now is a really big bank. And that flew in the face of convention. But what they were saying is, imagine what we can do. So I think that, because I'm a big fan of the markets, I think that the consumer will tell the banks what it is they need to do. I don't think it's about removing the frustration of showing up and saying, what do you mean I can't have the money today? You have to hold it for 3 days. Those are always irritants, but that's not the bank's fault. That's just prudence. So what they need to do, they could probably refine their profit model by reducing the number of branches that they have and turn that into greater value for the customer. But I still want them as stewards. I still like the idea that our leadership federally can sit down with bank CEOs and have a pretty good understanding of what's happening to the country. It would be chaotic to speak with a bunch of startup fintechs and ask them the same thing. They know where they hope to take the country. The banks need to be nagged to greatness, but I think they can be. So what would a great bank be? I don't know, because the question has to be, what could a bank with 4 million customers be suddenly? Not with ING Direct, we started with the potent question, what if we started over? How would you invent a bank? So I could answer that question in 1997. I just can't answer it today. But something will be invented that will represent the big bank, but it'll also be big, is my point.
Thank you for your perspective, which is definitely a new perspective, and that's perfect for the last video of the year.
Oh, good. So, the last. Yes.
So last question for you. So what did you do during this last 9 months that is different in your life, in your business? Did you pick up new habits?
Yes, I did. And I'm so glad you asked, because I now have a prop that I can use. I stopped using my glasses, and I'll tell you why. I've worn glasses since I was 4 years old, but on the 13th of March, as I contemplated the fact that I was not going to go and work in Mexico for a month, where we had rented a home, and I was going to work remotely because it's the same time zone and everything. So I felt rather emotionally exhausted. So I went for a nap and I rolled over and broke my glasses. And it wasn't until 5 months later that I could get them fixed. And so in that period, and this is relevant to the first point I made about the death of distance, I realized that I could make anything I needed to see be close to me without upsetting anybody. I'm as far as I need to be to read my computer perfectly. I'm as far as my television, et cetera, et cetera. I wasn't driving. I wasn't negotiating streets and such. So I learned to live without my glasses, which was a little weird. But at the same time, it changed who I am to some degree, that I was not wearing glasses. I know this is an incredibly boring little observation, because it's not about whether or not I had baths filled with vodka and things like that. I had the usual same. I found myself, as a second point, getting bored with television. I never thought that would happen, not in the universe we live in. And Zoom calls have solved another thing, which is that even though I'm loath to admit it, I have some hearing loss in both ears. And now I never have meetings in which people talk over each other because they're muted or I can hear it. So I find Zoom meetings much more efficient because I can hear everything perfectly and such. So I know those are cosmetic changes, but like everybody, I think that I'm working too hard, too many hours, because I have replaced the commute with work. And that has meant that I go too long and I start too early. But I'll be honest with you, I start too early because I'm excited to start early, and I go too long because I'm not paying attention. So I wouldn't want anybody to think that it's because I have so much work that we're doing so well, because we're all struggling and challenged to do this. But my work habits are such that even if I don't have an assignment, I have a reason to continue doing what I'm doing, for whether it's LinkedIn or any of the other areas in my life. So my biggest challenge has been to find an oasis, somewhere where I can remove myself, because right now I'm following American politics too much and other things, like everybody.
Like everybody, yeah. Well, and the LinkedIn tool, like, it's interesting because you're never done. You can do that 24 hours a day. There's always someone to reach out to and something to read and all that. So I'm putting strict guidelines around, whether it's the news, whether it's conferences, whether it's LinkedIn, because I think the challenge is first digesting all this information, and second, you just feel bad about yourself because you never have read everything and anything, so it just makes me feel bad. So now I'm just like, delete.
At the beginning of the pandemic, I read something that was rather amusing, even though it was very dramatic. It was from two Canadians who had been held hostage by a terrorist group in Africa at one point. And they said, well, we know what it's like to be in lockdown, and here's how you survive it. So this is from people who were locked down. They said, we only talked about our situation up until noon. We never talked about our confinement at night, because then we would lose sleep. If we lost sleep, we would start to deteriorate mentally. So I did the same thing. I found myself looking at the news at noon, watching Dr. Tam and listening to CNN. And then at 6 o'clock, just a little sort of hors d'oeuvre of news, if you will, and then nothing after that, because I still wanted to restore some part of normalcy to my day. And so my wife and I decided to do it that way. And that's a luxury that having being at home enables, because I was not somebody who tuned into the news at noon. And I guess that's the last thing that was influenced, is that those moments, my lunches are so short. I don't know what to do afterwards because I'm not communing with my colleagues and my staff. So you go back to work. Yeah. So you wonder why you're so exhausted on Friday, and you think, I haven't even been out of the house.
Well, thank you so much, Philippe, for taking the time, for sharing your thoughts today, and for being the last host of the year.
I love being last in this case. So thank you so much. I've enjoyed it very much. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, we'll see next year what we're going to speak about. So I hope maybe you'll be the first guest. Who knows?
That would be
Take
something.
care. Bye, Philippe.
Okay. Ciao.